Short sellers provide a good service to the markets. We can't do without them, basically because for two reasons. They provide liquidity in the markets. There's more activity, more liquidity, more money.
And it also brings balance from a rational exuberance. You must have missed what I was saying. I think you're a good guy. You're being honest. We could short big, evil, corrupt companies we don't like. I purely get it's just a tool, force of nature. I'm talking about Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, the insiders who are exempt from SEC rules, whose former officers sit in the Federal Reserve and SEC, who've gotten tens of trillions of banker bailout money to back up their derivative crap, because you were bringing up people selling garbage. I'm talking about listing garbage as AAA. That's criminal. And that's what I'm talking about. You know, you were getting off into, you know, on the show that I saw on BBC about Goldman Sachs, you know, making money in downtimes and they rule the world, and they were freaking out about that. So, I mean, that was just them freaking out about the obvious. I was just going further to the point of the rest of the story because you started to allude to how they're selling people toxic assets.
That's right, yeah. Well, that's absolutely true, and I would agree with you 100% because Goldman Sachs has been behind, as I mentioned, almost every major crash in history. And a good example is the dot-com crash. I myself, actually, Alex, was a victim of that crash. I was one of these donkeys in the year 2000 who bought these dot-com crap because, again, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just following the same strategy everyone else did, buy and hold stocks, and eventually you make money. What I didn't realize is, as I do realize now, is that Goldman Sachs, along with a whole bunch of other people, J.P. Morgan and everyone else, these guys have been overinflating these technology stocks, you know, inflating this bubble through a number of processes, which you probably know about. Like one is called laddering, where basically, you know, you promise your clients that, you know, you're going to give them a lower price of the stock. And eventually you say down the line, you will buy it at a higher price. So almost kind of guaranteeing that the price of the stock is going to rise and rise, you know, by this kind of manipulation. So yeah, Goldman Sachs been around, you know, they've been behind every major crash in history. And again, dumping these crappy stocks onto unaware investors and then betting against the very same people.
Sure, they invented the pump and dump, and if you look in third world countries, first world countries, they'll spend a decade getting their prime minister, their president, their finance minister in South America, in Asia, in Europe. I mean, it's always the same. This is a criminal crew. And I think them freaking out on you coming out and saying, hey, this is predatory, being honest about it, I mean, it was like saying, oh, my gosh, you know, you mean fish swim in the sea, or, you know, 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, it was the height of ridiculous. And for weeks, a week and a half, is he real? Is he real? When they could have just called you. We went and looked it up. They tried to say you were one of these yes men or something when you were simply stating that the sky is blue, that birds have wings, that, you know, I mean, it's just too amazing. Now, let's get more into this. Why specifically are you saying, because I agree with your analysis, but from your own research, why does Goldman Sachs rule the world? And then what are some of the strategies or gambits that people can use, that the establishment's using to profit from the engineered downturn? Because I know if the general public profits from it, that could actually screw up their actuaries and could actually help in the end if we just don't cookie cutter when they say buy and hold it while we slit your throat. If people actually learn what you and others have learned, then the magicians can't screw us.
Yeah, I wish that second point could be true. I'll come to that point in a second, Alex. As to the first one, as to why I said it, again, this is something I believe to be true. It's something, I mean, to be honest, it isn't something that interests me that much. I don't think of it too much about what Goldman Sachs is up to. But as to why I said it, I mean, here's one good example. As you yourself know, Alex, as many people may know, you know, a lot of ex-Goldman Sachs employees work in the government in the United States. I've already mentioned, a few days ago, I was in Ireland, and I mentioned on the show that Henry Paulson, this is a guy who was the former CEO of
Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, he gives himself banker bailout money and then gives himself his own waivers. You're talking about the revolving door. Please continue.
That's right. I mean, this guy was the architect of the bailouts, and this guy then was funneling all this money to his, you know, to his cronies like Robert Rubin and John Taines of Merrill Lynch, and, you know, they're basically making other guys in the city rich through bailout money. And you know, the fact is, the relationship between the banks and the government is so blurred that it's not really clear who is the puppeteer and who is the puppet. But people can make up their own minds about that as to who rules the world. And I'm
well, it's like an inbred family. I mean, it's a revolving door, as you just said. So it isn't the government or the mega banks that run it. It's like two Siamese twins. I mean, it's like a breed.
That's right.
I mean, these people do even intermarry, and so I mean that's what's happening right here. How do we stop it?
Yeah. Well, sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish your point.
Going to your second point about how the public can get on the game. That's the problem. You see, the problem is whenever people get on any game, it's too late. You see, that's why it's called the herd effect. The herd, I know it's an ugly word to use, but that's the truth. By the time the masses get on the game, it's too late. That's because the reason is the masses rely on the wrong kind of information.
Yeah, they watch CNBC, but that's my point. If you watch INFOWARS.com, I'm not tooting my horn, you're going to be years ahead. No, I'm serious. You're going to be years ahead, and you are not going to be in the herd. I agree. By the time the general public figures it out, gold will be at 5,000. Or by the time, you know, things like that happen. I mean, but I'm not talking about the herd. I'm talking about the inside baseball we're here discussing.
Yeah. Well, as far as what the institutions are up to, the point is actually, I mean, I don't really care what those guys. That's not the way I look at the markets. I mean, I don't do any kind of insider trading or anything like that. I don't have that kind of information. What I do is the legal way of trading, and it's the next best thing to insider trading. So for me, trading is trading off the charts and using as many tools as I have in my access to be able to discern what the insiders are up to. Okay. So, that's, as a trader, when you're trying to make an income from this and when you're trying to be able to make money from this, you can't really hope that you're going to get some inside tips. You need to use your own skills. You need to use your knowledge of how the market works and your analysis of the markets to be able to make money. And I'm putting it in layman's terms. I'm not going to technicals on this, you understand. So I hope that makes some sense.
No, that makes total sense, because any army can put out disinformation about their movements, but if you can visually identify the real movements and not the decoy movements, you can then get a general image of what's happening.
Well, let me give you an example. Alex. See, before all this technology came into action many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, these institutions, the smart money, the funds, they could do things and they could hide their actions. Nowadays, they can't do that very easily. They might be able to a little bit, but they can't do it because technology is now advanced to the point that whenever these big guys make any decisions, whenever they're making any kind of shifting of money from one thing to another, they leave trails behind. They leave footprints behind. And if you know how to follow those footprints, if you follow those trails, you can have a pretty big clue as to what's going on behind the scenes. So,
well, here's an example. Let's talk about in 1815 in Europe, continental Europe, Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon Bonaparte faces Lord Wellington. He's defeated in that pincer attack, that Prussian-British pincer attack. And the Rothschilds, this is on record, got their horsemen to gallop at full speed, exhausting the horses in a Pony Express, got on a fast cutter Corvette, shot across, went in and lied and said, Wellington is defeated, we're going under French rule. Stock markets dropped by close to 99%. Lord Rothschild started, selling it first to make them panic. He bought it all back up and became the head of the British Empire financially. Today, they couldn't really do that. So instead, they'll put out fake announcements that the announcement says one thing, the fine print says another, but people have learned to get in the fine print quickly. So, yeah, there's a lot of that going on. But sometimes they still announce. They announced Russia attacked Georgia, and I wasn't even ready for that 3-4 years ago. I went in and I said, they've attacked, and I actually went and searched, and it was like, no, Georgia attacked Russia. or that Russian-held area, so that they can still try these bold hoaxes. But look, finish up your point then. A few tips for people about what you're tracking right now, or you know, ideas you've had, you know, what you're writing about at the site that you blog for, and then also anything you can tell us about media contacting you. I mean, did they call and say, "Are you real?" instead of just saying, "Oh my gosh, it must be a hoax because this guy said the sky's blue"?
Yeah, the first few calls I got, I guess I shouldn't mention who called me, but a very, very prestigious newspaper, a magazine called me, and they asked me, aren't you, I mean, I had calls from all kinds of magazines, you know, and newspapers around the world. And one called me up saying, hey, aren't you the guy from the Yes Man? And I said, what are you talking about? What, Jim Carrey? What are you talking about? So, and I said, no, the Yes Man, that guy on the on Dow Chemical. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. When all this was kicking off and all these newspapers were coming to contact me, I couldn't figure out why, because I thought there was nothing controversial about what I said. But going back to your point about tips or anything like that, I would say anybody out there who's thinking about buying stocks got to be very careful, because one of the major mistakes anybody can make in a market that's going down, when stocks are getting cheaper, if you go and buy those stocks just because they're cheap, the biggest mistake is you're trying to catch a falling knife, because stocks can go all the way to zero. Yeah, just like what happened back in 2008 when many stocks like Lehman Brothers and some over here in the UK collapsed and went to zero. So you've got to be very careful. Don't stand in front of a freight train. Okay, so you got to make sure the stock is starting to go back up a little bit before you actually buy it. Okay, same with commodities.
You want it to find its bottom and then crest back up a bit just to be safe as a rule?
Exactly. You got to be very careful of the risks.
Well, what about this? I mean, what about knowing general devaluations in currency globally across the board? You're going to have a commodity crest across the board, short term, midterm, long term. They can artificially create some dips, raising margin calls and things, the case of gold and silver. But if you look at the 12-year graph on silver and gold or other commodities, it's really going straight up. So what about a general investment in midterm and long-term type commodities? Obviously, trying to play things short-term would take a lot of time, energy, and expertise. But what about just a general midterm, long-term commodities bet that they're going to go up?
Right. Well, the first thing I would say is whatever investment decision, medium to long term, you got to do, always take care of the risks. Always look at how much you can afford to lose. Don't ever gamble. Okay, but in terms of that, gold and silver, I think they're still pretty good commodities. Long term, they have good prospects. The only thing about gold and silver is at the moment, they're looking pretty weak. They've come down quite a bit. Gold is now about $1,600 an ounce. Silver about 30, 26 region last time I checked. You got to be careful. Again, those commodities need to gain some strength. They need to show some strength, start going back up again before you decide to buy them. But if they do, then they can be very good long-term assets to hold. You know, for example, gold, for example, could go back to $2,000 eventually. If it passes by 2,000, it could go to $4,000. So yeah, I mean the Chinese. Yeah, but
see, generally, I'm looking at a 12-year graph. If I was to put one on screen, I mean, if you look at a 12-year graph, it's got. In fact, give me a document cam shot, folks. I'll show you a 12-year graph, and maybe later after you leave, I can pull it up and show it to people. But anybody can just Google a 12-year graph. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So here's 1998. And then let's say 13-year graph, and let's say this is 2011, and generally, I mean, this is what it's doing. I mean, so